Clara Veylen's bright future ended in a farmhouse soaked with blood. Jonas Krail's temper made him the first suspect. Silas Dorn's eerie sketches dragged him into the spotlight, and Elara Quinn's shocking betrayal turned the investigation upside down. Together, their names became forever tied to the murder scene that no one in Windmere could forget. The town of Windmere had always been described as a place where nothing truly bad ever happened, where families left their doors unlocked at night, and neighbors trusted one another without hesitation. On most evenings, the only sounds that filled the air were the chirping of crickets or the hum of passing cars rolling along quiet suburban streets. But one late evening, that peace was broken in a way no one in Windmere would ever forget. Clara Veylen, a 29-year-old nurse who worked tirelessly at the local hospital, was expected to return home after finishing a night shift. She had made plans for the weekend, had promised her best friend Elara Quinn that they would meet, and had even spoken to her boyfriend Jonas Krail about seeing him the following day. But that night, Clara never came home. Her absence was felt almost immediately. She wasn't the type to disappear without letting someone know. The first sign that something was wrong appeared when Clara's car was discovered parked near the edge of a wooded trail not far from the hospital. The vehicle was locked, the windows rolled up, and everything inside seemed untouched except for one thing: the keys were missing. That small detail unsettled the police. If Clara had locked the car herself, then where had she gone? If someone else had locked it, then why take the keys but leave everything else behind? The woods near the trail were searched thoroughly, but no sign of her was found. For the people of Windmere, who were unaccustomed to disappearances and violent crime, fear began to take root. Detective Maren Holt, known across the county for her sharp instincts, was called in to lead the investigation. She walked around the parked car slowly, studying the ground nearby, noting how the tire tracks from other vehicles seemed to overlap. She noticed the faint impression of shoe prints leading toward the woods, though they disappeared into the leaves and dirt quickly. It was enough to suggest Clara had walked away from her car or had been led away. Something about the stillness in the air made Holt uneasy, as if whatever had happened wasn't random. She didn't say it aloud to the officers on scene, but her gut told her this was not going to be a simple missing person case. As the hours turned into a day, Clara's disappearance drew more attention. The hospital staff where she worked described her as reliable and hard-working. Patients adored her for her kindness, and colleagues insisted she had no enemy. Jonas Krail, her boyfriend, seemed distraught when interviewed, though detectives noted the frustration in his voice as he spoke about their recent arguments. Elara Quinn, her closest friend, told police that Clara had seemed nervous in recent weeks, though she never explained why. These small hints only deepened the mystery. The community organized search parties, combing through the wooded areas and the empty fields surrounding the town. Flyers with Clara's face began appearing on every street corner. Neighbors left their porch lights on through the night, both as a symbol of hope and as a shield against the unease that was spreading. Parents began warning their children not to stay out after dark, and stores locked their doors earlier than usual. The disappearance of one woman had fractured the fragile sense of safety that Windmere had always enjoyed. Detective Holt pushed her team to retrace Clara's steps on the night she went missing. Surveillance footage from the hospital parking lot showed Clara leaving after her shift, looking tired but calm. She was seen getting into her car, but no one could confirm where she had gone afterward. There were no cameras near the wooded trail where her vehicle was found, which left a frustrating gap in the timeline. The lack of evidence felt intentional, almost as though someone had carefully chosen the location to avoid being seen. Whispers began spreading through town, theories about who might be responsible. Some said Jonas had finally lost his temper. Others suggested a stranger had followed Clara from the hospital. A few pointed fingers at Silas Dorn, her reclusive neighbor known for his odd behavior. Detective Holt listened to the rumors but kept her focus on facts, reminding herself that speculation could be dangerous in a case like this. She was determined to stay ahead of the panic before it consumed the town. As the second night fell without Clara returning, the air in Windmere seemed heavier. People avoided walking past the wooded trail as if the very place where her car was found had become cursed. Detective Holt knew in her bones that time was running out. She didn't yet know what she was chasing, whether Clara was lost, kidnapped, or worse. But she understood one thing clearly: whatever had happened, it wasn't by chance. It was deliberate, and it was only the beginning of something far more sinister than anyone in the town was prepared to face. 2 days after Clara's disappearance, the town's worst fears were confirmed. A farmer driving along a dirt road on the outskirts of Windmere noticed something unusual about an old, abandoned farmhouse that had long been left to rot. Its front door, which normally hung half-closed, was wide open. Out of curiosity, he stopped and looked inside, only to stumble upon a sight so horrifying that he staggered back in disbelief. Within minutes, the police were called, and soon Detective Maren Holt was standing in the doorway of a nightmare that no one in Windmere would ever forget. The farmhouse was dark and smelled of mildew, but the air inside was thick with something more sinister: the metallic scent of blood. The floor was scattered with broken glass, old furniture toppled over as though a struggle had taken place. In the center of the room, illuminated faintly by sunlight seeping through cracked boards, lay the body of Clara Veylen. She had been brutally murdered, her clothes torn and stained, her hair matted with blood. But what made the scene most disturbing wasn't just the violence. The walls above her had been smeared with streaks of blood, arranged into haunting, almost deliberate patterns. Carved into the wooden beams overhead were symbols, crude but clearly intentional. They weren't random marks. They looked like someone had wanted to leave behind a message. Detective Holt stood frozen for a moment as she took in the grotesque scene. She had seen many crime scenes in her career, but this one had a calculated quality that chilled her. Whoever had done this hadn't simply wanted to kill Clara. They had wanted to stage the scene, to create something unforgettable, as if the brutality itself was a statement. The farmhouse, with its decaying walls and broken windows, had been transformed into a theater of horror. Forensic teams moved quickly to secure the site. Photographs were taken, evidence collected. Every corner of the room was examined, from the shattered remnants of a lamp on the floor to the footprints in the dust near the doorway. Holt observed everything silently, her mind turning over the strange detail. The position of Clara's body seemed deliberate, placed, not simply left where she had fallen. The blood patterns on the walls stretched upward, almost like symbols or signs of ritual. She knew the townspeople, once they heard of these details, would begin weaving their own theories of cults or rituals, but Holt wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. Still, she couldn't deny the unsettling feeling that the killer wanted attention, wanted the memory of this crime to linger. News of the discovery spread quickly, and panic gripped Windmere. Clara's friends and neighbors were devastated. People who had clung to the hope that she might still be alive now faced the reality of her violent death. Parents pulled their children closer, and whispers of a monster lurking in their quiet town grew louder. This wasn't the kind of crime anyone expected in Windmere. The farmhouse, once just a forgotten ruin, was now the center of everyone's nightmare. Holt gathered information from the forensic team. The time of death suggested Clara had been killed the same night she vanished, which meant she had been in the farmhouse for 2 days while the town searched desperately. There were signs of a struggle: bruises on her arms, defensive wounds on her hands, but there were also indications that she had been overpowered quickly. The most puzzling discovery came from the carvings in the wood. Each symbol was jagged, as though made with a knife, and while none of them matched anything Holt recognized, they repeated in patterns that couldn't be accidental. Someone had taken their time to mark the room. The farmhouse itself added another layer of mystery. It had no electricity, no running water, and was located far enough from town to ensure no one would stumble upon it easily. Whoever brought Clara there had chosen the location carefully. It wasn't just a place to kill, it was a stage to display the aftermath. Holt began to suspect that the killer hadn't just wanted Clara dead, but had wanted her death to be seen, remembered, and feared. As night fell and the farmhouse was sealed off, Holt stood outside in the dim light, staring at its silhouette against the sky. This wasn't going to be just another case of violence fueled by passion or anger. This was something far more disturbing, something that carried intention and design. Windmere had never seen anything like it, and Holt knew that uncovering the truth behind Clara's murder was going to drag every hidden shadow into the open. The murder scene wasn't just evidence, it was a message, and she feared that the person who had written it wasn't finished. As investigators began piecing together Clara's final days, the focus quickly turned to those who had been closest to her. Detective Maren Holt knew from experience that in cases like this, the people who seemed the most familiar often held the most dangerous secret. The farmhouse crime scene had given them unsettling clues, but not enough to identify a killer. To understand why Clara had ended up there, Holt needed to untangle the web of relationships in her life. The first person brought under scrutiny was Jonas Krail, Clara's boyfriend. Their relationship had been complicated, marked by frequent arguments that friends quietly gossiped about. Jonas had a quick temper, and though no one claimed he had ever been violent toward Clara, his jealousy was no secret. On the night Clara vanished, Jonas said he had been home alone, watching television. It was an alibi that no one could verify, and Holt found his demeanor odd during questioning. He appeared distraught, but his anger flared quickly when pressed about their argument. It was enough to keep him on the list of possible suspects. At the same time, Holt's attention turned to Silas Dorn, the neighbor who lived across the street from Clara's apartment. Silas was an eccentric man, often spotted wandering the streets late at night, or muttering to himself as he tended to his overgrown garden. His reputation for being strange had made him the subject of local gossip for years. When detectives asked where he had been the night of Clara's disappearance, Silas admitted to seeing her leave her apartment, but stumbled over the details of the timeline. First, he claimed it was just after dusk, then later insisted it was much later in the evening. His shifting story raised immediate suspicion. Holt wondered whether he had simply been confused, or whether he was deliberately hiding something. But the investigation didn't end with Jonas and Silas. Elara Quinn, Clara's best friend, became another focus. At first, Elara appeared heartbroken, devastated by the loss of the woman she had known since childhood. She told detectives that Clara had recently seemed unsettled, though she had never explained why. According to Elara, Clara had hinted about discovering something troubling, something she wanted to share but hadn't yet found the courage to reveal. Holt latched onto this detail. If Clara had uncovered something dangerous, it might explain why she had been targeted. Elara's nervousness during questioning, however, did not go unnoticed. She wrung her hands constantly, avoided eye contact, and appeared almost too eager to help. Holt had learned to trust her instincts, and something about Elara's grief felt rehearsed, as if she were performing for those watching. While interviewing those close to Clara, Holt also began reconstructing the victim's routines. Clara's co-workers at the hospital painted a picture of a woman who was kind, professional, and widely respected. None of them believed she had enemies, but a few recalled that Clara had been distracted in the days before her death, often checking her phone anxiously, or staring off as though something weighed heavily on her mind. One nurse mentioned that Clara had confided about receiving strange calls from an unknown number, though she never said more. It was another piece of the puzzle that pointed towards someone deliberately targeting her. The deeper Holt dug, the more she realized Clara's life had been filled with tensions that few had noticed. Jonas's temper, Silas's odd behavior, Elara's cryptic remarks about a dangerous discovery, each thread led in a different direction, but all were tied to Clara in ways that couldn't be ignored. The carved symbols in the farmhouse only added to the mystery. Forensic experts confirmed they were not random scratches, but intentional markings. Yet no one could determine their meaning, and without context, they felt like taunts left behind by the killer. As the investigation pressed forward, Holt found herself walking a line between clarity and confusion. Every suspect carried motive or opportunity, but none of the evidence was strong enough to make an arrest. The farmhouse scene haunted her nights, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the killer had wanted her specifically to see it, to wrestle with the details, and to feel the unease. Clara's death wasn't just about ending a life, it was about control, about sending a message through violence and fear. For the town of Windmere, whispers grew louder. Some believed a stranger had slipped into their quiet community. Others were convinced someone among them was hiding a monstrous secret. Holt knew that somewhere in Clara's circle was the truth, and the person responsible for the crime had been close enough to know her fears, her habits, and perhaps even her trust. The investigation was no longer just about solving a murder. It was about peeling back the carefully hidden layers of people who, on the surface, seemed ordinary, but in the shadows carried darkness no one had dared to imagine. Just when the investigation seemed to be circling around Jonas Krail, with his volatile temper and suspicious alibi, a sudden breakthrough shifted the focus in an entirely new direction. Forensic teams working tirelessly on the farmhouse evidence discovered that the strange carvings in the beams were not random marks at all. They matched sketches and drawings found pinned to the walls of Silas Dorn's cluttered home. When detectives searched his property, they were stunned to find dozens of pages filled with the same jagged symbols carved above Clara's body. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation and immediately made Silas the prime suspect. The townspeople, who had always whispered about Silas's eccentricities, now regarded him with outright fear. The image of the quiet, reclusive neighbor was replaced with something darker, and rumors spread like wildfire. Many insisted they had always suspected him of being capable of something terrible. For Holt, however, the evidence still felt incomplete. The symbols linked him undeniably to the farmhouse scene, but there were other elements that didn't fit neatly. The prints in the dust, the positioning of Clara's body, and the missing car keys, all of it suggested another layer beyond Silas's strange obsessions. As the forensic team worked deeper into the evidence, the case took another shocking turn. Fingerprints recovered from the farmhouse doorframe, initially overlooked, were run through the system once more. To Holt's surprise, they did not belong to Jonas or Silas. They belonged to Elara Quinn, Clara's best friend. The revelation struck with the force of betrayal. Elara had been the one who had first raised the alarm about Clara's disappearance, the one who had publicly demanded justice. Yet her prints placed her directly at the site where Clara had been murdered. The investigation into Elara's life intensified. Detectives combed through her home, searching for anything that might explain her presence in the farmhouse. What they uncovered was deeply unsettling. Hidden in a small box beneath her bed were Clara's missing car key. It was the one piece of evidence Holt had been searching for, and it tied Elara irrevocably to the crime. Alongside the keys were scraps of paper filled with Elara's handwriting, pages filled with thoughts about Clara that grew darker the longer they were read. They revealed a fixation, an obsession that bordered on dangerous. Clara was described in loving, admiring terms, but there were also passages full of resentment, jealousy, and rage. The discovery forced Holt to rethink the entire case. The symbols in Silas's home could no longer be taken at face value. Perhaps Elara had known about his odd drawings and used them as inspiration to stage the farmhouse, framing him in the process. Or perhaps Silas had some connection to Elara that no one had yet uncovered. For Holt, the evidence now pointed toward Elara as the architect of Clara's death, but the complexity of the crime suggested a deeper cunning than anyone had suspected from her. When Holt considered the possibility of Elara's guilt, other details began to make sense. Her anxious demeanor during interviews, her rehearsed expressions of grief, and her insistence that Clara had been hiding some dangerous secret, these all seemed like carefully crafted diversions. By suggesting Clara had been threatened, Elara had tried to steer suspicion away from herself. But the evidence told another story, one that revealed Elara as far more involved than she had ever admitted. The discovery left the town stunned. To think that Clara's closest friend could have been entangled in her death was almost too much to accept. People who had once comforted Elara in her grief now looked at her with suspicion and horror. The betrayal felt personal, as though trust itself had been shattered. Holt understood this reaction well. Crimes committed by strangers brought fear, but crimes committed by loved ones left scars that lasted longer. With Elara now tied directly to the farmhouse, the case shifted rapidly. The carved symbols no longer seemed like an inexplicable ritual, but rather a deliberate attempt to make the crime unforgettable. Holt suspected Elara had wanted more than to kill Clara. She had wanted to create a scene that would linger in memory, to shock the community, and to leave behind something grotesque and haunting. The farmhouse was more than a crime scene. It was Elara's twisted form of expression. For Holt, the challenge was no longer identifying who had been at the farmhouse. It was proving the motive behind the horror. She knew the truth was close, just beyond reach, and that Elara had carefully designed each step of the crime to manipulate suspicion. Jonas's anger, Silas's strangeness,
All had been distractions that concealed the real danger, hiding in plain sight. And with every piece of evidence, Holt could see the outline of a truth far darker than she had initially imagined. The killer hadn't been driven by impulse. The killer had planned everything, and that realization made the farmhouse not just a place of death, but a carefully written message of obsession and betrayal. The truth unraveled slowly, but once the pieces aligned, it painted a picture so disturbing that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. Elara Quinn, who had spent years by Clara's side as her closest friend, had been the architect of the nightmare that left the entire town of Windmere shaken. What began as silent envy had grown into a dangerous fixation, one that consumed her thoughts, until admiration turned into hatred. She had always felt overshadowed by Clara, the career in nursing that earned her respect, the affectionate relationship with Jonas Krail, the effortless way people admired her kindness. To Elara, Clara was everything she wanted to be but could never become. That envy festered until it became unbearable. Detective Maren Holt pieced together the sequence of events, with painstaking detail. Elara had lured Clara to the abandoned farmhouse, under the pretense of needing help. Clara, trusting her friend, had gone without hesitation. Once inside, Elara's jealousy and rage spilled into violence. The struggle was short, brutal, and one-sided. Clara had fought, as evidenced by the defensive wounds on her hands, but she never stood a chance against the ferocity of Elara's attack. When it was over, Elara's fixation on creating something unforgettable took hold. The symbols carved into the beams and the blood smeared on the walls weren't random acts. They were part of her twisted desire to transform the crime into a scene no one would ever erase from memory. The staging was deliberate. Elara had drawn inspiration from Silas Dorn's strange sketches, knowing that suspicion would easily fall on the eccentric neighbor once the markings were discovered. By planting Clara's body in the farmhouse, arranging the scene like a grotesque performance, and ensuring details were left behind to confuse investigators, Elara thought she had orchestrated the perfect misdirection. She even returned later, touching surfaces to further contaminate the scene, which explained the mixture of prints that initially caused confusion. Clara's car keys hidden beneath her bed revealed not just her presence, but her calculated effort to keep a piece of the crime for herself, like a trophy. For the town of Windmere, the arrest of Elara Quinn was almost impossible to accept. She had been the one most vocal in her grief, the one who had publicly demanded justice for her friend. To learn that the very person who shed tears and organized vigils had been the murderer was a betrayal that cut deep. People who had hugged her in consolation now recoiled at the thought of being near her. Friends and neighbors who once trusted her were left with the chilling realization that a killer had stood among them, smiling and pretending to share their pain. During trial, the details of Elara's obsession came fully into light. Her journals revealed her growing resentment toward Clara, her fantasies of erasing her from existence, and her fascination with creating a crime so horrifying that it would etch her name into the memory of the town forever. She had convinced herself that by destroying Clara she would finally step out from her shadow, but instead of admiration, she earned only revulsion. The jury needed little convincing. The evidence was overwhelming, and the disturbing writing sealed her fate. Elara was sentenced to life, her chance at freedom extinguished just as she had extinguished Clara's life. Yet despite her conviction, the murder scene itself lived on in Windmere's collective memory. The farmhouse, boarded up and abandoned, became a landmark of horror. No one dared to go near it after nightfall, and even during the day, its silhouette against the sky unsettled those who passed. Parents told their children to stay away, and whispers about the symbols carved into the beams continued long after the trial had ended. It became less a building and more a scar on the town, a reminder of the darkness that had once erupted from within its walls. For Detective Holt, the case left a lasting mark. She had solved countless crimes before, but none carried the same sense of betrayal and deliberate cruelty as this one. It wasn't simply the murder of a woman, it was the destruction of trust, the manipulation of grief, and the calculated attempt to leave behind a spectacle of horror. The farmhouse had been more than just the place where Clara's life ended. It was the stage for Elara's obsession, a chilling performance of envy and rage. In Windmere, people moved on with their lives, but the memory never faded. Clara Veylen became a symbol of how darkness can emerge from the least expected places, and Elara Quinn became the embodiment of betrayal. The murder scene that Elara created achieved exactly what she had intended. It was unforgettable. But instead of immortalizing her in the way she dreamed, it became a permanent reminder of her cruelty, a wound on the town's soul that would never truly heal.